Everyone froze when the chainsaw suddenly stopped. The officers stood motionless around the massive oak tree, their eyes fixed on something none of them could explain. There, buried deep inside the trunk, was something that should never have been there. Something that had been hidden for 5 long years. And when they finally pulled it out, what they discovered inside would shake this small Virginia town to its core. But here's what made this moment even more chilling. It wasn't a detective who found it. It wasn't a trained investigator. It was a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Max, a police dog who had spent 5 years waiting for this exact moment. A dog who never stopped searching. A dog who never gave up. What happened next would change everything, not just for the officers standing around that tree, but for everyone who had ever wondered what really happened on that cold November night half a decade ago. And trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end of this story. Because what they found inside that tree wasn't just evidence. It was a message. A message that had been waiting for Max all along. Now before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need you to do something for me. If you love stories about loyalty, mystery, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their dogs, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. And while you're at it, smash that like button and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever witnessed a bond between a dog and their owner that seemed almost supernatural? I want to hear your stories. Now, let's get back to Max. To understand what was inside that tree, and why it mattered so much, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a quiet town where everybody knew everybody. Back to a dog who never forgot. In the quiet town of Ridgewood, Virginia, nestled between the Blue Ridge Mountains and endless stretches of farmland, life moved slowly. People waved at their neighbors from front porches. Kids rode bicycles down tree-lined streets without a care in the world. And the local sheriff's department rarely dealt with anything more serious than a missing cat or a noise complaint on a Saturday night. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Until it did. At the heart of this peaceful community was the Ridgewood Sheriff's Department, a small brick building on Main Street with a flagpole out front and exactly 12 parking spots. And inside that building, there lived a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Max. Now, Max wasn't just any police dog. He was a legend. Over his career, Max had been credited with over 40 successful search and rescue operations across 3 counties. He'd found lost hikers in the mountains when everyone else had given up hope. He'd tracked down suspects through dense forests in the middle of the night. He'd located evidence that human investigators had walked right past without noticing. Max had a nose that could find anything, and a determination that never wavered. The other officers called him the miracle dog. They said he had a sixth sense, an ability to know things that no one could explain. But despite all his accomplishments, despite all the awards and commendations hanging on the wall of the sheriff's office, something about Max troubled everyone at the Ridgewood Sheriff's Department. Something they couldn't quite put into words. It started about 3 months after Max was reassigned to his new handler. Every Thursday evening, without fail, Max would do something strange. He would walk away from whoever was nearby. He would pad slowly across the station floor, his nails clicking against the tile. And he would sit at the back window, the one that faced Hollow Creek Road, and stare. Just stare. His ears would flatten slightly against his head. His tail would droop low, almost touching the ground. And his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, would fill with something that looked almost like grief. He'd whine softly, so quietly you could barely hear it. Then he'd sit there for hours, watching the road, waiting for something, or someone, that never came. The first time it happened, the officers thought he was just tired. The second time, they thought he might be sick. But by the 10th time, by the 20th time, they stopped trying to explain it. They just accepted it as part of who Max was now. Every Thursday evening. Same window. Same road. Same quiet, heartbreaking vigil. Officer Jake Mitchell was Max's current handler. Jake was 32 years old, born and raised in Ridgewood, and he joined the sheriff's department right out of high school. He wasn't the most ambitious officer on the force, but he was steady and reliable, the kind of guy you wanted backing you up on a difficult call. When Max was reassigned to him 3 years ago, Jake didn't ask a lot of questions. He just accepted the dog and tried to do his job. But over time, Jake had grown to love Max deeply. He'd learned the dog's quirks, how he always sniffed the air 3 times before entering a new building, how he preferred his water bowl filled exactly to the brim, how he would tilt his head to the left whenever he heard a siren in the distance. Jake knew Max better than almost anyone. But there was one thing about Max that Jake never understood. The Thursday ritual. Every week, Jake would watch Max walk to that window and sit down. And every week, Jake would kneel beside him, place a hand on the dog's thick fur, and ask the same question. "What is it, boy? What are you looking for?" Max never turned his head. He never acknowledged Jake's presence. He just kept staring at that road, his breath fogging the glass in slow, steady puffs. Sometimes Jake would sit with him for an hour, just keeping him company. Other times, he'd give Max a gentle pat and walk away, knowing there was nothing he could do to ease whatever pain the dog was feeling. Jake had asked around the station about Max's behavior. He'd talked to the other officers, the dispatchers, even the sheriff herself. But everyone gave him the same response. A shrug. A shake of the head. A quick change of subject. It was like they all knew something they didn't want to talk about. Like there was a story behind Max's Thursday vigil that nobody wanted to tell. And for the longest time, Jake let it go. He figured if it was important, someone would have told him by now. He figured some things were better left in the past. But Jake was wrong. Because what he didn't know, what nobody talked about anymore, was that Max wasn't just staring at Hollow Creek Road. He was staring in the direction of the old Whitmore property. An abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. A place where something terrible had happened 5 years ago. A place where Max's first handler had vanished without a trace. And every Thursday, the exact same day of the week it happened, Max would sit at that window and wait. Wait for a partner who never came home. Wait for answers that nobody could give him. Wait for a chance, any chance, to find out what really happened that night. You see, Max wasn't just a police dog. He was a dog with a mission. A mission he'd been carrying in his heart for 5 long years. A mission that was about to reach its end. Because in just a few days, Max would return to the Whitmore property for the first time since that terrible night. And what he would find there, what he would lead the officers to discover, would change everything. The town of Ridgewood was about to learn the truth. The question was, were they ready for it? What really happened to Max's first handler on that cold November night 5 years ago? Why did he vanish without a trace? And what does any of this have to do with that strange lump hidden inside the old oak tree? The answers are coming. But first, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the partner Max lost. Back to a man named Michael Dawson. And the night everything changed. Officer Michael Dawson had been Max's first handler. And if you asked anyone in Ridgewood about Mike Dawson, they would tell you the same thing. He was one of the good ones. The kind of man who made you believe in heroes again. Back in 2019, Mike and Max were inseparable. They trained together at the Virginia State Police Academy in Richmond, a grueling 12-week program that pushed both human and canine to their absolute limits. Most handlers and their dogs took months to build a working relationship. But Mike and Max? They connected on day one. It was like they spoke the same language. Like they could read each other's thoughts without saying a word. The instructors at the academy had never seen anything like it. They said Mike and Max moved like one unit, perfectly synchronized, completely in tune with each other's instincts. When Mike turned left, Max was already there. When Max caught a scent, Mike knew exactly what it meant. They graduated top of their class. Not second. Not third. First. And when they returned to Ridgewood, the whole town celebrated. There was a parade down Main Street. The mayor gave a speech. Kids lined up to pet Max and shake Mike's hand. For a brief, shining moment, Ridgewood had its very own hometown heroes. And everyone believed great things were coming. Now, to understand why Mike Dawson mattered so much to this community, you need to understand who he was as a person. Mike wasn't the kind of officer who did the job for the glory. He wasn't looking for promotions or commendations or headlines in the local newspaper. He just wanted to help people. It was that simple. On weekends, Mike coached Little League Baseball at the community field behind Ridgewood Elementary. He wasn't even getting paid for it. He just loved watching kids learn the game, loved seeing their faces light up when they finally hit the ball over the pitcher's head. He'd stay after practice for hours, helping the kids who needed extra work, giving pep talks to the ones who were ready to give up. And he never once complained. On his days off, Mike would drive his pickup truck to the homes of elderly residents who couldn't get around easily anymore. He'd bring them groceries. He'd mow their lawns. He'd sit on their porches and listen to their stories about the old days. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who was 92 years old and lived alone on Maple Avenue, once said that Mike Dawson was the only reason she hadn't moved to a nursing home. "That young man checks on me more than my own grandchildren," she told the sheriff once. "He's got the kindest heart I've ever seen." And she wasn't the only one who felt that way. Everyone in Ridgewood had a Mike Dawson story. The time he helped the Hendersons fix their fence after a storm knocked it down. The time he talked a teenager out of making a terrible decision and drove him home instead of arresting him. The time he worked a double shift on Christmas Eve so the officers with young kids could be home with their families. Mike never asked for recognition. He never expected anything in return. He just showed up, did the right thing, and went home to his small apartment on Oak Street where Max would be waiting for him. That was who Michael Dawson was. That was the man Max loved more than anything in the world. And that was the man who vanished on a cold November night in 2019. It happened on a Thursday. November 14th, to be exact. The weather had turned bitter that week, temperatures dropping into the low 20s, frost covering the fields every morning, the kind of cold that made your bones ache. Mike was working the night shift. It was supposed to be quiet. Thursday nights in Ridgewood usually meant nothing more than a few traffic stops and maybe a noise complaint from someone's barking dog. But around 11 o'clock, a call came through dispatch. Someone had reported suspicious activity near the old Whitmore property, an abandoned farmhouse on the eastern edge of town that had been sitting empty for nearly a decade. The caller said they'd seen lights flickering in the windows. Said they'd heard strange sounds coming from somewhere on the property. Said something just didn't feel right. Mike took the call. He loaded Max into the back of his patrol car and headed out toward Hollow Creek Road. The drive took about 15 minutes. The roads were empty. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. And the temperature kept dropping. At 11:47 p.m., Mike radioed dispatch. His voice was calm, steady, the same voice he always used, no matter what situation he was walking into. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I'm at the Whitmore property. Going to check something out near a massive oak tree on the property line. Stand by." The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission. And then there was silence. 20 minutes passed. Dispatch tried to reach Mike on the radio. No response. They tried again. Still nothing. At 12:15 a.m., Sheriff Patricia Collins dispatched 2 backup units to Mike's location. Deputies Marcus Reed and Tom Hensley arrived at the Whitmore property 8 minutes later. What they found made their blood run cold. Mike's patrol car was parked at the edge of the tree line. The engine was still running. The headlights were still on, cutting 2 pale beams through the darkness. Inside the car, Mike's radio sat on the driver's seat. His flashlight lay on the ground outside, about 10 feet from the vehicle. And Max. Max was still in the back of the patrol car, barking frantically, scratching at the cage, desperate to get out. But Mike was gone. No footprints leading away from the car. No signs of a struggle. No evidence that anything violent had occurred. He had simply vanished. The search began immediately. Within hours, every available officer in the county was at the Whitmore property, combing through the fields, the woods, the abandoned farmhouse itself. Search dogs were brought in from 3 neighboring counties. The FBI sent a team from their Richmond field office. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment swept the mountains. Divers searched the lake 2 miles north of the property. For 3 solid weeks, they searched. Day and night. In freezing rain and bitter snow. They searched until their legs gave out, until their voices went hoarse from calling Mike's name, until hope began to fade like the last light of a winter sunset. They found nothing. No body. No clothing. No trace of Michael Dawson anywhere. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. The case went cold. Officially, Mike was listed as missing and presumed deceased. There was a memorial service at the Ridgewood Community Church. The whole town attended. People wept openly in the pews. The mayor gave another speech, this one filled with grief instead of celebration. And Max? Max was reassigned to Officer Jake Mitchell 3 months later. But everyone noticed that the dog had changed. He was quieter now. More withdrawn. He did his job well enough, followed commands, tracked scents, worked alongside Jake without complaint. But something in his eyes had shifted. The spark that had once burned so bright, the joy, the energy, the fierce determination, had dimmed. And every Thursday evening, without fail, Max would walk to the back window of the station and stare toward Hollow Creek Road. Staring in the direction of the Whitmore property. Staring toward the place where he had last seen his partner alive. The other officers pretended not to notice. They went about their business, filed their paperwork, made their small talk. But they all knew what Max was doing. They all understood. He was waiting. Waiting for Mike to come home. Waiting for answers that might never come. Waiting for someone, anyone, to finally tell him what happened that night. 5 years passed. And Max never stopped waiting. But here's what nobody knew. Here's what nobody could have predicted. In just a few days, Max would return to the Whitmore property for the first time since that terrible night. And what he would find there, hidden inside an old oak tree, would prove that some secrets don't stay buried forever. What was waiting inside that tree? Why had it been hidden there for 5 long years? And what did it have to do with Michael Dawson's disappearance? The answers were about to surface. And nothing in Ridgewood would ever be the same again. 5 years passed. 5 long, quiet years in which the name Michael Dawson slowly faded from everyday conversation. People in Ridgewood still remembered him, of course. They still spoke about him at church on Sundays. They still mentioned his name when they passed the little league field where he used to coach. But life had moved on. The way life always does. New officers joined the department. New cases demanded attention. New problems replaced old ones. And the mystery of what happened to Mike Dawson became just another unsolved story, a cautionary tale that parents whispered to their children about the dangers of the world beyond their quiet little town. Only one soul in Ridgewood refused to forget. Only one heart kept the flame of that memory burning. Max. Every Thursday evening, the ritual continued. The slow walk to the back window. The drooping tail. The quiet whine. The eyes that stared endlessly toward Hollow Creek Road. Officer Jake Mitchell had learned to accept it. He'd stopped asking Max what he was looking for. He'd stopped trying to understand. He just sat with the dog sometimes, placed a hand on his back, and let him grieve in his own way. But deep down, Jake always wondered. What did Max know that nobody else did? What was he waiting for? And would he ever find peace? The answer to those questions was about to arrive, in a way that nobody could have predicted. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in late October when Sheriff Patricia Collins called Jake into her office. The leaves had turned golden and red across Ridgewood. The air carried that familiar autumn chill that signaled winter was on its way. And the old Whitmore property was finally scheduled for demolition. The developers closed the deal last month, Sheriff Collins explained, sliding a folder across her desk toward Jake. They're building a community center on that land. Youth programs, after-school activities, that kind of thing. Jake nodded slowly, unsure why this required a private meeting. Before the bulldozers move in, I need someone to do a final sweep of the property, the sheriff continued. Make sure there's nothing out there that shouldn't be. No squatters, no hazardous materials, no surprises. She paused and looked directly at Jake. I want you and Max to handle it. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Whitmore property. The last place Mike Dawson had ever been seen. The place Max had been staring toward for 5 years. Sheriff, Jake said carefully, are you sure Max should go back there? After everything that happened. Sheriff Collins leaned back in her chair and sighed. I've thought about that, she admitted. But honestly, Jake, maybe it'll be good for him. Maybe seeing the place get torn down will give him some kind of closure. I don't know. Dogs are smarter than we give them credit for. She shook her head slowly. That property has haunted this department long enough. It's time we all moved on. Jake wanted to argue. He wanted to say that taking Max back to that place felt wrong somehow, like poking at a wound that had never fully healed. But he didn't. He just nodded, took the folder, and walked out of the office. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, Jake loaded Max into the back of his patrol car and headed east toward Hollow Creek Road. The irony wasn't lost on him. Thursday. The same day Mike had disappeared. The same day Max spent every week staring out that window. And now they were going back. The drive took about 15 minutes. Jake kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Max in the back seat. The dog was perfectly still. His ears were perked forward. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead. He knew. Somehow, Max knew exactly where they were going. When they finally turned onto the gravel path that led to the Whitmore property, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The place looked exactly as he'd imagined it. Worse, maybe. The old farmhouse stood at the center of the property, a two-story wooden structure that had been slowly rotting for over a decade. The windows were shattered. The roof had partially collapsed. The front porch sagged dangerously in the middle, like it might give way at any moment. Weeds and wild brush had consumed the yard. Rusted farm equipment sat half-buried in the overgrowth. And at the far edge of the property line, standing tall and ancient against the gray October sky, was a massive oak tree. Jake parked the patrol car and stepped out. The air was cold and still. No birds singing. No wind rustling the leaves. Just silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. Jake walked around to the back of the car and opened the door for Max. The moment Max's paws hit the ground, everything changed. Jake had worked with Max for 3 years. He knew the dog's behaviors, his patterns, his tells. He knew when Max was relaxed, when he was alert, when he was focused on a scent. But he had never seen Max act like this. The dog's entire body went rigid. Every muscle tensed. His ears pinned forward so sharply they almost touched at the tips. His nostrils flared wide, pulling in deep, rapid breaths. And his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, locked onto the massive oak tree at the edge of the property. "Max," Jake said softly. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge Jake's voice. Instead, he pulled. Hard. The leash went taut in Jake's hand as Max lunged toward the tree with a force that nearly knocked the officer off his feet. "Whoa. Easy, Max. Easy." But Max wouldn't stop. He pulled harder, his claws digging into the dirt, his body straining forward with desperate urgency. Jake had no choice but to follow. They crossed the overgrown yard in seconds. Max weaved through the brush, leaped over fallen branches, dodged rusted equipment, never once taking his eyes off that tree. When they finally reached the oak, Max began circling the trunk frantically. He barked, loud, sharp, insistent barks that echoed across the empty property. He pawed at the bark. He jumped up, trying to reach something higher on the trunk. Then he stopped, sat down, and stared upward. Jake followed the dog's gaze. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. Just bark. Just branches. Just the normal texture of an old weathered oak tree. But then he noticed it. About 8 feet up the trunk. There was something wrong with the bark. It bulged outward in one spot, an unnatural lump that didn't match the rest of the tree. Moss and overgrowth had covered most of it. Years of weather had worn away the edges. But now that Jake saw it, he couldn't unsee it. That lump hadn't grown there naturally. Something was inside the tree. Something that had been deliberately hidden. Jake's heart began to pound. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12, he said, his voice barely steady. "I'm at the Whitmore property. I need backup. And tell Sheriff Collins she needs to see this herself." "Copy that, Unit 12. What's your situation?" Jake stared up at the lump. Max sat beside him, perfectly still now, his eyes never leaving that spot on the trunk. "I'm not sure yet," Jake said slowly. "But I think we just found something that's been buried out here for a very long time." He lowered the radio. And waited. Within an hour, the quiet Whitmore property would be swarming with officers. They would bring ladders and flashlights and cutting tools. The local fire department would stand by. A crowd of curious onlookers would gather at the property line. And when they finally cut into that tree, when they finally pulled back the bark and revealed what was hidden inside, nothing in Ridgewood would ever be the same again. What was buried inside that ancient oak? Why had it been hidden there for 5 long years? And what did Max know that nobody else did? The answers were just moments away. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what they were about to find. The team worked carefully. Slowly. Methodically. Nobody wanted to rush this. Nobody wanted to damage whatever was hidden beneath that strange bulge of bark. Sheriff Patricia Collins had arrived within 30 minutes of Jake's radio call. She brought Deputy Marcus Reed, Deputy Tom Hensley, and 2 officers from the neighboring county who happened to be in the area. The local fire department had sent a truck with ladders and emergency equipment. And word had spread quickly through Ridgewood, the way word always spreads in small towns. By the time the cutting began, a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the property line. Neighbors, shop owners, curious teenagers who should have been in school. They stood in clusters, whispering among themselves, craning their necks to see what was happening at the old oak tree. Nobody knew what to expect, but everyone sensed that something important was about to be revealed. Jake stood at the base of the tree, holding Max's leash loosely in his hand. The dog hadn't moved since backup arrived. He sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the spot 8 feet up the trunk, his body calm but alert. It was the stillest Jake had ever seen him. Like Max knew that everything he'd been waiting for was about to be uncovered. Like 5 years of sitting at that window, 5 years of staring toward Hollow Creek Road, 5 years of silent, patient grief, all of it had been leading to this exact moment. Deputy Reed climbed the ladder first. He positioned himself carefully, bracing his boots against the rungs, leaning in close to examine the lump. "It's definitely not natural," he called down to Sheriff Collins. "Looks like something was wedged into a hollow spot in the trunk, and the tree just grew around it over time." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Can you cut around it without damaging whatever's inside?" Reed studied the bark for a long moment. "I think so. But it's going to take a while. This thing has been in here for years." "Take your time," Collins said. "We're not going anywhere." And so the cutting began. Reed used a small handsaw to carve around the edges of the lump. The work was slow and painstaking. Every few minutes, he'd stop to brush away sawdust and examine his progress. The crowd grew larger. The whispers grew louder. And the tension hung in the air like fog before a storm. 45 minutes passed. An hour. Jake's legs ached from standing in the same position. His fingers had gone numb from the cold. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Not when Max was watching so intently. Not when they were so close to answers. Finally, Deputy Reed set down his saw. "I think I've got it," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "There's definitely something in here. Some kind of container." Sheriff Collins stepped forward. "Pull it out. Carefully." Reed reached into the hollow space he'd carved. His gloved fingers wrapped around something solid. He pulled. And the crowd fell absolutely silent. In Reed's hands was a weatherproof metal box. It was small, roughly the size of a shoebox. Sealed with electrical tape that had yellowed and cracked with age. Covered in dust and debris from years of being entombed inside the tree. But intact. Completely intact. Reed descended the ladder slowly, cradling the box like it was made of glass. When his feet touched the ground, he walked directly to Sheriff Collins and handed it over. The sheriff stared at the box for a long moment. Her face was unreadable. But Jake noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Open it," someone in the crowd called out. Others joined in. "Yeah, open it." "What's inside?" "We've been waiting long enough." Sheriff Collins raised a hand for silence. The crowd obeyed. She turned to Jake. "You found this," she said quietly. "You and Max. You should be the one to open it." Jake's throat went dry. He looked down at Max. The dog was staring at the box with an intensity that made Jake's heart ache. This was it. Whatever was inside that box, it was connected to Mike Dawson. Jake could feel it in his bones. He stepped forward. Took the box from the sheriff's hands. His fingers fumbled with the old electrical tape. It crumbled and flaked away at his touch. The lid was stiff, sealed tight by years of moisture and temperature changes. But finally, it gave way. Jake lifted the lid. And looked inside. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. His brain refused to accept it. But then the reality hit him, and he felt the blood drain from his face. Inside the box were 3 items. The first was a badge. A Ridgewood Sheriff's Department badge. Jake lifted it with trembling fingers and turned it over. Engraved on the back was a name. A name that made the entire crowd gasp. Officer Michael J. Dawson. Jake heard Sheriff Collins inhale sharply beside him. Heard Deputy Reed whisper something under his breath. heard the murmurs ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. But he couldn't respond. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at the badge in his hand, the badge of a man who had vanished without a trace 5 years ago. The second item was a sealed envelope, white, weathered, with a single word written on the front in careful handwriting. Max. Jake felt his knees go weak. Someone had left a letter for the dog. Whoever had hidden this box in the tree, they had known that Max would find it someday. They had been counting on it. The third item was a photograph. Jake lifted it carefully, afraid it might crumble in his fingers. The image showed a man kneeling beside a young girl. The man was Mike Dawson. Jake recognized him immediately, the same face that hung on the memorial wall at the station. The girl was maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was smiling brightly, holding a stuffed animal in her arms. Mike's hand rested gently on her shoulder. They appeared to be standing outside a hospital. Jake turned the photograph over. On the back, in Mike's handwriting, were 7 words. 7 words that raised more questions than they answered. She's safe now. That's all that matters. Sheriff Collins stepped closer. Her face had gone pale. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Open the envelope," she said. Jake hesitated. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the paper. But he knew he had to. He knew everyone was watching. He knew Max was watching. He slid his finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Jake unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same careful script that had written Max's name on the envelope. The same handwriting as the message on the photograph. Mike Dawson's handwriting. Jake began to read. The letter started with words that sent chills down his spine. "If you're reading this, then Max finally led someone here. I always knew he would." Jake's vision blurred. His heart pounded in his chest. He kept reading. The letter explained everything. 5 years ago, Mike had stumbled onto something during his investigation at the Whitmore property. Something terrible. Something that involved powerful people in neighboring counties. A child trafficking operation. Mike had found a young girl, Emma Sinclair, being held in an abandoned building on the property. He had rescued her. But he had also realized something terrifying. The people running the operation had connections everywhere. In local government. In law enforcement. In places that should have been safe. If Mike had reported what he found through normal channels, Emma and her mother would have been in immediate danger. So Mike had made an impossible choice. He hid the evidence in the tree. He relocated Emma and her mother to a safe location. And then he disappeared. He vanished deliberately, not because something had happened to him, but because he needed the world to believe he was gone. It was the only way to keep Emma safe. The only way to protect the evidence until the right moment. Jake's hands were shaking violently now. He could barely hold the paper. But then he reached the end of the letter. And what he read there changed everything. The final lines were coordinates. Latitude and longitude. A location somewhere far from Virginia. And beneath the coordinates, a single sentence. A sentence that made Jake's heart stop. "I'm still alive. Come find me." Jake looked up from the letter. His eyes met Sheriff Collins' gaze. She was crying. Tears streaming silently down her weathered face. "He's alive," Jake whispered. The words felt impossible. Unreal. But there they were, written in Mike's own hand. Mike Dawson is alive. And at Jake's feet, Max did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He stood up. His ears perked forward. His tail began to wag. Slowly at first. Then faster. Like he understood exactly what the letter meant. Like he had known all along. Like he had been waiting for this moment since that cold November night 5 years ago. But the question remained. If Mike Dawson was alive, if he had been hiding all these years, then where was he now? What had he been doing? And after 5 years of silence, was he ready to come home? There was only one way to find out. 2 weeks later, a team from the U.S. Marshal Service traveled to the coordinates written in Mike's letter. The location led them deep into the mountains of rural Montana, a place so remote that the nearest town was over 40 miles away. No cell phone service. No internet. No connection to the outside world. Just endless forests, rugged terrain, and silence. The kind of silence that swallows a person whole. The marshals drove for hours on unpaved roads that wound through valleys and over ridges. They passed through stretches of wilderness where no human being had set foot in years. And finally, just as the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, they found it. A small cabin. Wooden. Weathered. Barely visible through the thick pine trees that surrounded it. Smoke curled gently from a stone chimney. A pickup truck, old but well-maintained, was parked beside a stack of firewood. And on the front porch, sitting in a worn rocking chair with a book in his hands, was a man. He looked older than his photographs. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His face was weathered by years of harsh mountain winters. A thick beard covered his jaw. But his eyes, those steady, kind eyes, were exactly the same. The marshals approached slowly. Their hands rested near their weapons, but they didn't draw. Something about the man's posture told them he wasn't a threat. He'd been expecting them. When the lead marshal called out his name, his real name, the man didn't run. He didn't panic. He simply set down his book, rose from the rocking chair, and smiled. "Took you long enough," Michael Dawson said quietly. "I always knew Max would figure it out eventually." The marshals exchanged glances. They had prepared for resistance. For denial. For a confrontation. But Mike offered none of that. He simply walked toward them, hands visible at his sides, and nodded. "I'm ready to go home," he said. "It's time." The flight back to Virginia took 6 hours. Mike sat in silence for most of the journey, staring out the window at the clouds below. He answered the marshal's questions calmly and thoroughly. He explained everything: the trafficking operation, the rescue, the decision to disappear, the years spent hiding in Montana under a different name. He told them about Emma Sinclair and her mother, who were now living safely in another state under new identities. He told them about the powerful people who had been running the operation, some of whom had since been arrested on unrelated charges, their networks slowly crumbling over the years. And he told them about Max. About the bond they had shared. About the trust he had placed in his partner to one day lead someone to the truth. "I couldn't tell anyone where I was going," Mike explained. "I couldn't risk it. But I knew Max would never give up. I knew that if I left him a trail, even just a small one, he would follow it eventually." He paused and looked down at his hands. "I just didn't know it would take 5 years." When the plane landed in Richmond, a convoy of vehicles was waiting to transport Mike the final stretch to Ridgewood. Word had spread. The whole town knew he was coming home. And by the time the convoy turned onto Main Street, the entire community had gathered to welcome him. News crews lined the sidewalk, their cameras flashing. Old friends stood in clusters, tears streaming down their faces. Fellow officers waited at attention outside the sheriff's department, their uniforms crisp and their badges gleaming. Children who had been toddlers when Mike disappeared now stood with their parents, holding handmade signs that read "Welcome home, Officer Dawson." The mayor was there. The fire chief was there. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now 97 years old, had been wheeled out in a chair, a small American flag clutched in her trembling hands. Everyone wanted to see their hero return. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment. But Mike didn't look at the cameras. He didn't wave to the crowd. He didn't shake hands with the mayor or embrace his fellow officers. Instead, he stepped out of the vehicle, scanned the sea of faces, and found the one soul he had been waiting to see for 5 long years. Max. The German Shepherd stood at the edge of the crowd, held loosely on a leash by Officer Jake Mitchell. His ears were perked forward. His tail was still. His eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, were locked on the man walking toward him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The crowd fell silent. Even the news cameras stopped flashing. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Mike knelt down. Slowly, gently. He opened his arms wide. And he waited. Max didn't hesitate. Not for a second. The dog bolted forward, his paws barely touching the ground, his leash slipping free from Jake's grip. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat. And he crashed into Mike's chest with the force of 5 years of waiting. 5 years of sitting at that window. 5 years of staring toward Hollow Creek Road. 5 years of refusing to give up. Max whimpered, a sound so raw, so full of emotion, that it brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. Mike buried his face in the dog's fur. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. And for the first time in 5 years, Michael Dawson cried. He cried for the time he had lost. He cried for the sacrifices he had made. He cried for the partner who had never stopped believing. And Max just pressed closer, his tail wagging furiously, his whole body trembling with joy. They stayed like that for a long time. Man and dog. Partner and partner. Reunited at last. The crowd watched in silence. Hardened officers wiped their eyes. News reporters lowered their microphones. Even Sheriff Patricia Collins, who had seen more in her career than most people could imagine, had to look away to compose herself. It was the kind of moment that words couldn't capture. The kind of moment that stays with you forever. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the cameras had gone, Mike sat on the steps of the sheriff's department with Max at his side. The sun was setting over Ridgewood, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jake Mitchell walked over and sat down beside them. For a while, nobody spoke. Then Jake asked the question that had been on his mind since the moment he'd read that letter. How did you know? How did you know Max would find the box after all those years? Mike smiled softly. He reached down and scratched behind Max's ears, the same way he used to do when they were partners. Because Max never gives up on the people he loves, he said quietly. He looked down at the dog. Max looked back. And something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, a bond that time and distance could never break. And neither do I, Mike added. Max's tail wagged once. Slow. Content. Like he finally had everything he needed. Like 5 years of waiting had been worth it. Like he was home. Some bonds are stronger than time. Some heroes wear badges. And some, the most loyal, the most faithful, the most extraordinary, wear collars. This is where our story ends. But before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed a bond between a human and an animal that defied all logic? A connection so deep, so powerful, that it seemed almost supernatural? If you have, drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I would love to hear about the Max in your life. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you laugh or cry, or believe in loyalty just a little bit more, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like this one, stories about love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that hold us together, they deserve to be shared. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, some heroes don't wear capes. Some heroes wear collars. Until next time.